Hi everyone, welcome to Air Dialogue's panel discussion event. Tonight's topic is the implications of racism on mental health and overcoming structural obstacles. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our speakers and welcome. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Our speakers will be answering questions later, so you can drop your questions down below. So a bit about Air Dialogue before we start. Air Dialogue was established in Dublin in 2010. Its sister charity is Dialogue Society, with the aim of advancing social cohesion by connecting communities, empowering people to engage and contribute to the development of ideas and on dialogue and community building. It is now widely recognized that experiencing racism may lead to negative mental health consequences, aggravated by income inequality, adversive economic conditions. Reports of racism in Ireland reveal that the highest number of violent assaults in the country have to date was in 2019, leading the EU with some of the worst rates of hate-motivated harassment. So let's hear from our speakers, a 10-minute introduction each. First, I'd like to give the stage to Rosemary, who was a founder and former CEO at Association Mixed Race Irish and member of the Irish Collaboration Forum.
Oh God, I'm on mute. Yes, that must be the most overused word in the 21st century thus far. What a great topic. What a great topic, and how pertinent that is. And one of the things you mentioned was that Ireland had the second highest level of racist abuse in all of Europe. That's kind of frightening. It's kind of frightening. I suppose I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health expert. However, I do have over 30 years experience working within the supported housing movement within the UK. Now, unlike Ireland, organisations like housing associations can have 50,000 units, 50,000 properties. So the supported housing field is particularly big, and I've been a senior manager within that sector. One of the things that I kind of noticed, you know, the old expression, sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt. When it comes to structural racism and mental health, that is so not true. It beggars belief, because most of us will recognize that structural racism is complex, but it also has a symbiotic relationship with the political, economic, legal, and cultural norms of that particular society. My question then is to our listeners: what does it feel like to be always regarded as the non-normal? Whiteness is the de facto position of the norm. What must it be like to always, from the moment you take your first breath, to be seen as not normal, where blackness itself is seen as illegal? And we see that in the incarceration rates. We see that in the exclusion numbers for our young children, in particular black boys. And you know, I remember growing up in Ireland a very long time ago, and people talk about fight or flight. What they never really talk about is the other part of it, which is fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze is a really important one that's very rarely ever acknowledged. And growing up in Ireland as the poster child for the not normal, I spent most of my childhood in a state of frozenness. I was always frozen. I was helpless. I was in Irish industrial schools, mother and baby homes. There was nobody around that even looked remotely like me. There were notions of savagery imported onto my little black body. And when we talk about racism and mental health, it's not just the physical abuse. I go back to my opening statement of sticks and stones and all the other good stuff. the name calling, the lack of respect, the cultural, if you like, the cultural negativity, where you're treated with less respect, you're not given the same value and access to goods and services. It starts there. And people call it microaggressions. I'm too old to be going down the line of microaggressions. I'm going to stick with everyday racism. It's the kind of racism where you're going in and you want to buy a loaf of bread, Brennan's bread, I love that bread by the way, and a pint of milk, and the shopkeeper doesn't hand you the change. He drops it on the counter. That's what everyday racism looks and feels like. And you grow up with that, and you grow up in this bubble of hyper alertness, extraordinary stress, always afraid that somebody's going to victimize you. And of course, in Ireland, there are no protections for you anyway. If you are a person of colour, if anybody knows that you're of a traveller ethnicity, your legal protections are pretty skimpy, actually. Your access to all services is defined by cultural negativity. You look at in the UK, for example, there was a recent program on it. It talked about 1 in 5 of black women have had a very serious impact as a result of maternity services. That's in Britain. When you consider that the BAME community, as I call them, generally called over here, is almost like a fifth of the British people. 1 in 5 of those black women have almost died giving birth. You look at COVID, and you think to yourself, my goodness, these are doctors, these are nurses, they'll be at the cusp of all the good stuff and cutting medicines, and they were disproportionately affected as well. And then when you come to mental health, we are twice as likely to be introduced to the mental health service at the end of a policeman's baton, or to be involuntary. There are normally a couple of ways you'll be introduced to mental health services: your GP, the police, or involuntary introduction. And as people of colour, we're more likely to be introduced in the latter categories. In fact, we're twice as likely to be introduced. Add to that cultural reservations about discussing mental health within the black community. It's a bit like homosexuality. Everybody knows what's going on, but nobody wants to talk about it. And then you also add, this is just my opinion based upon my own observations, you also add the fact that when the black person is introduced at the point of a truncheon to mental health services, what on earth would make you think they're going to trust that service? So when they are presenting for more services, do you really think they're going to say, yes, doctor, I could do with a bit more drugs? The other point, of course, is that we're more likely to be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. White people suffer from depression. We suffer from paranoid schizophrenia. And of course, I come also to the idea of the Eurocentric nature of the psychiatric services. It's white people telling us who've grown up in a state of not being the norm that there's something wrong with us. And then we're introduced to the psychiatric service at the end of a truncheon. And somehow we're expected to, accept it? And we know, or certain studies have shown, that when it comes to psychiatric assessments, we fare very badly. So in terms of what I would like to see, I'd like to see less focus on us as the client, the sick person, and more about the whiteness of thinking, strategy, theory, critical theory. I'd like to see a lot more of that under review. You look at a number of studies, and it's all about white psychiatrists talking about us. Where are we in the conversation? Where are we? We're not there. And one of the things that, and I noticed from my own experience, because I managed loads of projects, and a lot of them had to do with mental health, and a lot had to do with young black men. And the one thing, two things usually happened. Number one, if they saw me, they relaxed. That's the first thing. So diversifying the whole field of mental health has got to be a priority. I doubt if you were to go to any mental health unit in Ireland and find a black nurse or a black psychiatrist. I mean, point them out, because I'll give them a Nobel Prize of my own making. That's the first thing. They need to see us reflected amongst their caregivers. Yeah. The second thing was that they never felt listened. And when you grow up being told you're not normal, when you grow up and you absorb this cultural negativity that you're never going to be up to scratch, and then you are confronted with mental health services, and the position is that actually we're not going to listen to you. And that's what I found from my own experience working with vulnerable mental health people. The one thing they always complained about was that they just weren't listened. And as I said very briefly, if we're having studies, include the service users. Where are our voices? If you cannot get the professionals, you've got a plethora of us to choose from within the mental health service itself. I'd also like to make a point about, when we're talking about racism and mental health, this doesn't just include the BAME community. It really doesn't. Travellers, they have extraordinarily poor outcomes when they engage with mental health services, whether it's in Ireland or in the UK. Irish people, it's very easy for, if you're in Ireland, it's very easy to forget that Irish people are actually an ethnic group within the UK, and they have very poor outcomes for mental health services. They're more inclined to depression, they're more inclined to suicide. I think, I just think that we should try a slightly more bottoms-up approach. And what I'm adding to all of this is my experience growing up in Ireland as a child, institutionalized, absolutely made to feel the other, being told I was stupid from day one, that, the mother and baby homes is a classic example. Our children were eugenically tested for likely intelligence based in no small part on how light or dark their skin was. How stupid is that? But that happened. And that's history today. So if the children of mixed race women have been subjected to eugenic testing about their intelligence, and if they're not taken out of a system of incarceration, which is what happens to a lot of our youth who are young offenders, they get assessed, they're statemented, they're failing at school, they're underachieving, they're excluded. School itself has its own positive environment. You remove the child from that, where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? What are their parents going to do? And the African Irish community in Ireland is amongst the most highly educated group in all of Europe. But I have been particularly perturbed to learn of a number of the African Irish trying to anglicize their name in the hope that it might get their CV in front of the recruiter. That's the level we're at. So if we start at, we're talking about the political, social, economic, and all the other good stuff. But if you can't even get a good job and you've got a degree, you are storing up a lifetime of inequality. Housing, job prospects, health, and there's no free health in Ireland, by the way. You've got the NHS in England, and that's pretty bad as it is when it comes to accessing for mental health and people of the BAME community. But in Ireland, you're totally stuffed. You're totally stuffed. So you have this cumulative effect. And then you add on top of that, the psychiatric industry is all about statementing. And I must say that I wasn't surprised at the treatment of George and Chenko. I wasn't surprised because the African Irish community in Ireland, it's a burgeoning, it's a new community. My concern is that they're going to import Western ideals of the psychiatric, psychiatric faults, the almost like genetic fault that all black people are either druggies, welfare queens, robbers. And don't forget the 2014, I'll add on this note, Elizabeth, the 2014 citizenship referendum was a really, really classic case of racializing the whole idea of blackness. And it got that citizenship referendum was pushed through because the narrative was all of these heavily pregnant women, African women, were coming over to Ireland and they were taking our houses, taking our welfare, taking our jobs. That's where it started. That's where the real push started. So my hope would be get more diversity within the mental health system in Ireland. We need white people to examine their own whiteness, their own privilege. We're talking about it the whole time. You guys need to be talking about yourselves for a change and inviting us to contribute our experience. That's my bit. Thank you, Elizabeth. I hope I didn't go over or under.
No, thank you so much, Rosemary. You made a lot of important points, especially the point about when speaking about Black issues and Black problems, Black people are not involved in the conversation. And also the point you made about fight or flight or freeze. Personally, I experienced the freeze and it's not spoken about. So right, yeah. Next, I'm going to go to Vessy. She's the founder of Vessy.com, where they provide diversity, inclusion, and mental health strategies.
Elizabeth, thanks for having me. Yeah, so a bit of context of maybe like why I'm here. So I work with organizations across Europe and North America, published 2 international independent reports, and at the moment, I'm studying psychotherapy, and I focus heavily on the overlap of diversity and inclusion and psychotherapy. So, and it's been something that has been especially interesting to me, not just as a gay person or like identifying as non-binary, but seeing how important people in my life who are not white, like what experiences they go through, and I'll touch upon some of those points. So like the most obvious barrier when we're talking about racism and its impact on mental health, it's the intergenerational trauma. In the US for centuries, it's I was listening to a podcast that was specifically looking into how intergenerational trauma among, I think, minorities and racial minorities is affecting the attachment style. Rosemary touched on a few of the points there. It affects, how we relate to ours, so the quality of our relationships, how well we can do at school. So much like it just like basically from birth, our first days, we are shaped by a trauma that we didn't even personally experience. So that's the first layer, massive. Then we start, people starting to experience discrimination themselves. In Ireland, let's say in like a girls only school, you can have Black girls sitting together and the white girls would be sitting separately. The teachers not asking really the Black girls to contribute. It's like the white kids would be like the favorite students, and they would have very low expectations from the group of Black kids. they would be heavily discouraged from going for, like, let's say, like advanced maths or, you know, specific like language classes, etc. So so many levels of bias there. And sure, it's great for students and adults as well, you know, to see Zainab Boladeo on screen. But when you're, you know, when you're experiencing this kind of tiering, so you're less of a human on a daily basis. And I think very often when people experience things like that, there is an element of like, oh, maybe I did something wrong, or like I'm not good enough. So then it's internalized very deeply. But then when people go for, you know, housing, you know, an apartment viewing, or like hopefully buying a place, you know, so there was a report on discrimination and inequality in housing in Ireland. So someone like me, white, non-Irish, experiences discrimination 3.7% of the time. Someone who's Irish is 3.5. So it's virtually the same. There isn't much of a difference, 3.5, 3.7. But if it's someone who's Black, it's 17.1. So it's about, so my partner would be experiencing 5 times, is more likely to experience discrimination in a housing setting 5 times more. So it isn't just what we internalize. It isn't just, you know, getting basically shelter. We're talking about the most fundamental human needs, but also, as Rosemary mentioned, we get different access to healthcare. And when I say we, you know, white people get different access from Black people and other ethnic minorities. It's frightening, you know, hearing this, like 1 in 5 Black women have almost died giving birth. I don't know if you have stumbled upon this in older, and not too old, fairly recent, but no longer in use, textbooks that are about healthcare, like medical textbooks. There would be heavy stereotypes. So they would go into, you know, let's say if you have a Jewish patient, you know, they're more likely to complain. If you have like a Black person, they're more likely to, you know, they can take on more pain, etc. So hence receiving, so some of those things, even if they're not studied now, maybe for like 10, 20 years max, so very recent textbooks, you know, it becomes just a stereotype, so it's still living. And hence, you know, 1 in 5 Black women almost having died while giving birth. So, you know, we have the intergenerational trauma, we have the discrimination on so many levels through the different systems like school, housing, healthcare. And then the casual and not so casual racism, you know, the boys in Dublin, like pushing someone into the like the canal, or just like shouting into, or so like verbal or physical violence. And as if that's not enough, then there is the PTSD from having had experiences like that, and re-traumatizing through seeing yet another person dying just a few days ago. I'm talking about Dante. And in the meantime, streaming the, you know, like the trials for George Floyd's murder. And even like seeing, I think it was CBN, like wrote an article how George Floyd's girlfriend used to teach Dante in high school some years ago. And I think even that piece of news is so traumatizing, because it feels like it can be, okay, maybe it's not someone who you know today, but it's only a matter of time. And that's that just takes any level of stability and hope for the future. So you're basically people getting robbed by their most basic thing, like hope for change. Yes, there is the stigma in the specific communities, like in the Black community, talking about mental health. Then there is also the lack of, you know, funds to invest in something like mental health. So less income, less access to mental health, and mental health services are very expensive in Ireland. And on top of that, Black people don't seeing themselves represented in the mental health space. So not feeling represented automatically means not feeling understood and supported. It was amazing to see last year the formation of Black Therapists Ireland. One of them has also founded an initiative called Racism on the Couch. I don't know if I would be allowed to attend because I think it's meant to be more of a safe space. But there are three very important things related to representation I want to emphasize on here. So the first one is considering to go to therapy. So if you don't see yourself represented, you automatically think, I will not be accepted. In general, by definition, therapy is meant to be non-judgmental, authentic on the side of the therapist. And so it's kind of like receiving, in a sense, unconditional acceptance, love, and support. And the problem is when a white person can be embodying all of this trauma we're talking about, it's really hard to even consider that person could be providing and could provide this level of understanding. So I see a lot of Black people not even considering to start therapy, first for the stigma, but then even when the stigma is not limiting them, the thought of actually opening up to someone who is the oppressor or is symbolizing the oppression and chronic abuse. And then let's say, okay, someone does start therapy, starting to trust. That is, I would argue that it takes longer. As Rosemary said, when they see your face, people relax because they feel comfortable, they feel safe. So getting to the point, so maybe it takes some patients, maybe 3 months, others clients 3 months, 6 months, others 12 months to start trusting their therapist. So how does it change for when we have people from we have a white therapist and then we have, let's say, a Black client coming in? Is it from 12 months to 18? Is it 24? Like, what's the issue? Because usually it's depending on the attachment styles, it predetermines how much time we will need to build that trust in the therapeutic alliance between the therapist and the patient. So I would be really curious. I don't think anyone has examined that, but it would be amazing to see when that moment is and how much longer it is having the predisposition for a different attachment style, and then plus having a white therapist. And then the third thing here is, okay, let's say, one has started therapy, trust has been established, but do they see it as something that they can commit themselves to long term? On the one side, maybe there is a perceived limitation for how in-depth the person wants to go. So, if I talk about racism, will you understand me? Maybe you will not, or maybe you will discount, like invalidate some nuances because you don't understand them, you haven't experienced them. But also, do I see it as an investment in my mental health, or do I see it as a financial burden? And that brings us back to the socioeconomic background. A lot of the practitioners, not just in Ireland, but I would say in the UK, in Europe, possibly even globally, are female middle class white practitioners. I also find it interesting that at the same time, it's we look up to male role models in the field, Freud and Jung and Lacan and Carl Rogers, Viktor Frankl, Irvin Yalom, and so on. And it's on a rare occasion that we hear like an author, like thought leader in the field, who is like someone's daughter or wife. It's almost like they need to be associated with a man, again, to be even considered in the field. And it's still all very European centric and white. But it's interesting when like Melanie Klein talks about the split of the good from the bad, and how as individuals we hopefully work towards integrating the two. I think everyone struggles with that. The therapists, the lecturers teaching psychotherapy, the patients, trainees and students, were very often seen as only one thing. And I'll give you an example in a second, but being seen as only one aspect of ourselves only contributes further to this like otherness and isolation and invisibility. So we feel objectified, and there is like a primitive fear of annihilation. I've been reading a great book by Dr. Dwight Turner on the intersection of privilege and otherness in counseling and psychotherapy. He's a senior lecturer in the University of Brighton. And so he's a straight Black therapist, male. And in his book, he also includes like personal reflections on his interactions with the clients, and how like he's sharing a story how a specific client chose to come to see him because he is a Black therapist. And he was like, okay, wait, so I'm only seen as Black. But then another person will come in and say, you know, you're a man, etc., etc. And he'd be like, okay, so now you don't see my Blackness. Are we ignoring that? Am I ignoring that? Is that like allowed? And it's interesting to see how this objectification is affecting him internally as the one providing, therapy at that moment. A friend of mine once said that as a gay Black woman in Ireland, she often felt like she had to choose which one she had to be. The Black community wouldn't accept her gayness. Patrick, you wouldn't accept her, female nature. Ireland wouldn't accept her Blackness. There is always something. And she felt that like in a different space, she needed to choose to be only one of those three, because it would be impossible for the space to hold her identity being all three. And I'll offer a personal reflection. It isn't specifically about race, but I thought it was interesting. So as a patient going to my own therapist, when I started, I had so many assumptions. I assumed she was female, that she is straight, that she was brought up middle class, that she had kids, that she lives in South Dublin, that she's monogamous, able-bodied, middle-aged, neurotypical, white. I also thought she was English because of the university that she graduated. And it took me maybe 2.5 years to understand that, yeah, like for some of those assumptions, I was right. But for some of them, I was incredibly wrong. And, it's not important about which ones I was right or wrong, but I was also projecting things that, maybe I found oppressive in a sense in my own journey. So I think it's interesting that, when each one of us considers help, regardless of all of the barriers that we face on our personal journey, we always have an idea of like who that person will be that we can allow ourselves to us. For example, I see straight women being comfortable with a female therapist or with a gay therapist. I see then gay women being comfortable with want anyone but a straight man because of where their own oppression has been coming from. Black people typically not wanting a white therapist, but sometimes kind of not having a choice going there. But again, it probably limits how far that journey can continue, and if it's seen as a long-term commitment or it's just as as fixing an acute state, like when we're, let's say, at the highest of our anxiety or the highest of the depression, that's when we need it. And the moment it's a bit more manageable, we stop. So my point here is understanding intersectionality is critical in the educational and in the so in the education for psychotherapy and in the practice just as much. And I can share a link to Dwight's book in the chat, but it's interesting that when practitioners, so like the experts in the field, get trained, there's barely any coverage on the topic. It's all packaged as cultural diversity, and so there may be like a session or two on that. And you know, how much can we cover on cultural diversity when just unpacking racism doesn't take, you know, one webinar or, you know, a series of webinars. So a lot more than that is needing. So we need reform in the education, but we also need additional, you know, courses that support those who are interested and who understand. And Dwight's book is actually one of the first ones on the topic. So it's amazing to see that it's starting to get examined beyond just, you know, some like umbrella cultural diversity where anything can be included.
Thank you so much, Vessy, for your contribution. A lot of insightful points there. The point about experiencing discrimination, even in housing, medical books teaching students that Black people have a higher pain tolerance. Yeah, a lot of insightful points. Thank you so much for that. We're gonna go to Dr. Colletta, who is an expert and educator at cross-cultural social work and anti-racist practice.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I am really, really sorry that there has been a number of misunderstandings about this seminar. So I thought it was on the 21st, and it happens to be on today. So I'm actually, you know, I am actually going to speak just from the heart, because I didn't prepare a presentation. I came in when Rosemary was speaking, and I felt sad that I came in and just got the tail end of her presentation. I'm a fan of Rosemary, unknown to herself. And Vessy, thank you also for your presentation. I'm a social worker, and I am a lecturer in social care at Dundalk Institute of Technology. But what I want to talk about is my own experience of being a Black woman, the only lecturer at a college with over 500 lecturers, and my experience of racism, and really how I understand when we talk about the relationship, the core relationship between mental health and racism, what it can do to a person. So I started working where I work at Dundalk Institute of Technology in 2008. And the event that traumatized me and caused me to experience racism was from students. So you would imagine that if you are the only Black person within a space, well, then maybe, and you'd also imagine that if you are in that high position, it means something, and people are going to either respect you or not, but respect you. But I learned that racism is that kind of COVID-like virus, which knows no boundaries. It doesn't actually care or matter whether you're the Taoiseach or you're the president or you're what, it still comes to you. I mean, racists don't really care who you are, as long as you are Black, or as long as you can be discriminated on, they come at you. So what happened in my situation is I and you can imagine a lot of my students would be white Irish students. So it's very unusual to have a Black lecturer, because that causes, for them, it's like, oh, right. So my colleagues don't understand this. They never get it, that when I walk into a classroom, students, white Irish students, have to get over the fact that A, I'm Black, B, that I can actually speak English, C, that I can teach, and that D, I can examine their work and pass or fail them. The power suddenly changes. The power is, the tables are turned.
Yeah.
And I am on the other side. And as I sit on that side, it should be a comfortable space, and it is, because I've made it so, but it's a challenging space. So I was doing my PhD when I started teaching at DKIT. So I was thinking very analytically, very critically, very, very sharp. Students submitted work which had been plagiarized. They copied and pasted from things and copied and pasted it. And I was very, very at the height of my academic. I tuned into it and I saw, no, this is plagiarized work. So I failed 15 students out of a class of maybe 45. And there was holy war to burn, because A, you are Black, B, you are new, and C, you're coming here to fail us. You don't even belong here. Who do you think you are? Right? Just simply like that. So it does not actually matter how many qualifications you have, whatever you are, but no, but we're gonna take you on. So I remember these students, so they went on Facebook, and back in the day, 2008, I didn't know a lot about Facebook. They wrote on Facebook, she must be deported to the Congo where she came from so that she can swing on the trees with the monkeys. Right. So one of the students came behind the scenes and said to me, Colletta, did you see what's on Facebook, what the students have put about you? And I said, no, I didn't. And she showed it to me. Okay. So I was not technical savvy, but I went and I told my manager, and I told him, look, this is what has happened. This is what the students have done. Do you know what my manager said to me? He said, Colletta, don't mind students. Just go and teach. Just don't mind them. Groups of students come and go. And because they come and go, next year you'll have another group, and next year life will teach them lessons. And I said to him, do you know what? I thought this was an educational establishment where we teach students, and you are telling me that these students must go out there and life will teach them something. I thought my job was to teach. That's what I'm here to do. So this is holy news to me that you're telling me that life will teach them. I think we should be teaching these students that they can't be racist to lecturers. I mean, that's just not okay. But what I want to emphasize is that for me, my experience of how your mental health can be so impacted by racism is that it hits the core. It hits at you, somewhere inside you. It hits something about you, your personhood. It hits that part that says you are not good enough, or you're not even supposed to be here, or who are you? And because it does that, the trauma, the pain is so intense, and only you who are feeling it can actually understand it. So what I did was I walked out. I said, I'm teaching social work, I'm teaching social care, I'm teaching values of care. And you tell me to go and teach people who are racist to me. I can't do that. And there was a big inquiry, and I remember someone came to mediate between me and my college. And do you know what that person said to me? That person said to me, Colletta, if you try to fight an institution, you will never be able to work here in Ireland. And you just need to work this out, but you need to think of yourself. And I said to them, you know what? I come from Zimbabwe, from Africa. I came to this country with my suitcase, one suitcase and 3 children. And if I must compromise on my values, well, then I will go back and swing with the monkeys as your students have told me I will do. So one thing that got to me so badly was that I thought, if I'm teaching people who are supposed to be care people, and they are racist to me, who has all the qualifications in the world, they are going to work with vulnerable people. We are talking here about the impact of racism on people who are marginalized, who are disadvantaged. Social workers, social care workers, they work with those people. It's a double whammy if they are racist. It is tragic. It is unbearable. And I couldn't stand over that. So I walked out. I walked out and I went home to my house and sat for 1 full year and took the institution to the labor court, and I won my case. Because I said, I will not, this thing that I'm being told that you will not be able to work here, I did that, and I've come back to the place and I walk very tall. And I said, when there was an issue of, oh, we will pay, we'll settle this, we'll have a settlement, I said, no, I don't want money, I want justice. If you promise me that your students will never be racist to any Black person, and if you do something and put something in place. When I got into the space and Rosemary was talking, Rosemary was saying, we just want white people to challenge their white privilege. So don't buy me out. Just challenge your racial prejudice. Just challenge yourself so that the space that we all occupy can be livable, so that we can all breathe. Mental health stops people from breathing. We know that. I don't have to tell you that. Racism stops people from breathing. And really and truly, if those who are in those privileged spaces can just check themselves out, that is all that's needed. That there is enough space for everybody to breathe. But we must all equally breathe. And we can only do that if those who perpetuate racism stop. It has to be stopped. And it's all to do with self-introspection. It's all to do with checking oneself out. And I mean, when you think about it, how do I feel when I am the only Black lecturer among over 500 lecturers who are all white, and among a cohort of students who is predominantly white? But nobody stops to think about that. I don't feel anything bad, because I just think, do you know what? I've worked hard to be in this space. I'm in this space. Someone was talking about representation. When Black students, when I walk in the room and there happen to be 1 or 2 Black students, they see themselves. All of a sudden, they see themselves in the classroom, and they see that they are capable of being a lecturer. They see that this is not rocket science. They see that this can be achieved, it's possible. And for their mental health, that is a great thing. It's not good for their mental health to see people who are white all the time. They begin to think, oh my God, so my space is just here on this desk. I can never stand up there and be a thing, because they're not represented, because they're not there. And Vessy, you were speaking about intersectionality. Yes, the intersection of race, gender, and what have you, when it all culminates and comes together, it can become, and you know, you can have all these layers of things, of intersections, but when you add race to it, wow, there's an explosion. If you are Black, and if you are a Black gay person, and if you are once you add race to the equation, it's just, there's an explosion. It's bad. I'm not trying to equalize oppressions. It is bad enough as it is. But just add your color to it, well then, you know, there's an absolute explosion. So I just want to just thank everybody who has spoken before me. Rosemary, Vessy, I heard your presentations when I came into the room. I echo everything that you have said. And like I said, I didn't come prepared with a PowerPoint presentation or whatever. I just brought myself. But as I listen to you, I can identify 100% with what you are talking about. And the whole thing is around inequalities, this lack of social justice. Social justice is they are just ideals. These are just things that governments and organizations speak about. But these ideals, unless they can be realized in practice, the injustice just remains and people continue to suffer. And it's very, very sad. Very, very sad. When we think of travelers, you were talking about travelers, Rosemary. When we think about travelers, before we Black people were ever in the space, they have been here forever and forevermore. And they have suffered discrimination for donkeys of years, God knows what. And the statistics, as you were all saying, speak for themselves. But the challenge is why does nobody care? Why do the powers that be not care? They don't care because they are so steeped in their privilege. And the privilege is too much for them to even see what's going on around them. So I just think, as a way of going forward, I think we should not tire. We should not get tired of challenging a broken system. We don't need inclusion into a broken system. We need a new system that cherishes all, a new system. When I hear people talking about integration, inclusion, I'm just thinking inclusion into what? This is a broken system. The whole thing is so broken. We need new thinking, new energy, new ways of looking things, new ways of looking at, and again, I come back to you, Rosemary, you talked about starting from the grassroots. When we listen to voices of people, the person who knows if the shoe is tight or if it fits well is the person who wears the shoe. But if we never speak to the people who wear the shoe, how will we ever know?
Yeah.
Strategies after strategies, policies after policies, this guidance after this guidance, it's not working. It doesn't work because we don't talk to those people. And when consultations are done, sometimes they're just in the periphery. They're just done to tick a box. So until we push for people being real, people being, I teach a module called Care in a Multicultural Context, which I wrote myself. And I always say, I want people who are diverse to come into the room and to speak to you about diversity. You work with, they're the voice of experience, the voice of lived experience. So reading theories after theories, I know theories are great. I teach them myself, but I don't believe that they're the answer to everything. I do think that the lived experience, students need to be challenged. I think something needs to be disturbed. Education must disturb the way we think. Look at you, when I came in the room, someone was talking about the fact that you see students who are Black sitting on their own. I see that at my college all the time. It's disgusting. Very disgusting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colletta.
I always said, what is this? Have I gone over my time?
No. Thank you so much for your personal account. I think it's very important to hear from that you not only challenged the system but came out on the other side and won. I think that's so important for us to hear, to give us like confidence to do the same and not to just be silent.
Yeah, don't be silent, and don't be silenced. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's very important to stand up for what you believe.
Of course.
And this thing of, you'll never work in this country. I thought just, if I must say, that's like prostituting myself. If I must sell my soul for a job and sacrifice my that's worse than prostituting myself.
You're an amazing example for younger people, Dr. Colletta. Honestly, amazing,
thank you so much.
amazing.
Amazing.
And they can learn from you.
We're going to take some questions from the audience.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Our first question, anyone can answer. Research states that due to racism, mental health affects more than physical trauma. How does this differ for adults to children, and do you have any pointers for us to cope?
I'll bite on the subject of coping. I think one of the things that we don't really talk about enough is the power of the listen. The power of the listen. I get quite a few families approaching me, and their children are going through a tremendous amount of racism in schools. And I'm talking about particularly mixed race families, or where it's a white Irish mom and a mixed race kid, single parent family. And one of the things that actually struck me was this idea of somehow separating the issue of the child's experience over there somewhere. We have a special session for that one. You know, you've got schools and the whole notion of the LGBTQ plus agenda. Schools are very, very happy with that. There's nothing around racist bullying of our children in schools. And one of the things I do say, especially to the white Irish moms, look, you need to bring it across the table, across the dinner table. You know, this is not separate from you. It's not separate from your child. This is a family issue. And I do think that sometimes we don't listen enough. You know, as parents, as adults, it's all about, oh God, oh God, oh God, don't hurt, don't hurt, don't hurt. But actually, by doing that, we're not necessarily allowing the child the freedom to express their feelings. And one of the things about racism is that, and it drives me up the wall, we are programmed not to discuss racism. We've all heard chip on your old shoulder, be grateful, go back to where you come. We are programmed not to discuss racism. And I think we need to be breaking that programming by bringing it back into the family. Thank you, Elizabeth. Probably doesn't make any sense to anybody, but there you go.
No, thank you so much for that. I think speaking about the issues and not giving them the opportunity to speak out is very important. The next question, how can the social economic status play a role in this coping of the stressors of racism?
Allies! That's all I'm going to say, everybody. Somebody else come in. Allies! We need white people to become true allies. And that means hearing sometimes uncomfortable truths. Not always, but just sometimes uncomfortable truths. And the thing is, when we are sharing these truths, they're just that, our truths. They're not meant to make our white allies uncomfortable. They're just not. It's our, you know, as Dr. Colletta said, it's our lived experience.
Yeah.
It's our lived experience. And as an ally, don't want you to cry me a river. I really don't want you to do that. I just want you to hear me.
Yeah.
I just want you to hear me, human being to another human being. Let's get rid of the critical race theory, woke culture, all the other good stuff. Just hear me, human to human. Sorry, everybody.
Thank you.
I was thinking something when earlier you just left a comment that whether let's say Black people or from any other ethnic minority or Asian should be discussing racism with their therapist. I think they should, because when people share among each other, let's say with their family or with their friends, we could feel supported, but we're not necessarily going through the healing process that therapy can take us through. Because it is a risk, right? Because we don't know if the person on the other side, and even if it's an ally, let's say, it doesn't have to be a therapist, right? Just an ally. Before going into those conversations, we don't know where they are on their journey and if they will be able to meet your needs, sharing and addressing the uncomfortable truth, the uncomfortable for them and the reality for you. But I guess that's the only way of finding out. But it's also their job to check in and I guess in the context of both as an ally and as a therapist, if a loved one, or in the other case a client, is not bringing up racism that is getting so much media coverage at the moment, with yet another murder, maybe the therapist should break the typical approach and actually bring it up proactively to give that signal, and as a friend, to say, hey, how are you coping with this going on? Because we can't rely that the person who is experiencing it will feel comfortable and will take this leap of faith on their own. I guess it's on both sides. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think the point you made about the therapist being proactive and bringing up the conversation because the client might be reluctant to do so is important.
Yeah, because in general, a therapist would not do that unless it was specifically mentioned maybe in a previous section, and they'll say like, oh, can we go back to that to, explore it a bit more? But I guess because it's race and, racism, and if the therapist is white, they probably need to bend the rules a little bit around that to actually do their job. I would be curious what therapists, certified therapists think about.
The next question is actually for you, Vessy. How can we eradicate white supremacy?
I wanted to say like in 3 quick steps, but unfortunately that's not it. There's so many subtle things that that originate from white supremacy, and I think I was reflecting on that recently. Like, so let's say having been brought up in Bulgaria, where there would be very few Black people growing up, I probably didn't get a lot of biases at that period of time. But then, like, watching movies, seeing characters like living abroad, etc., you do get exposed. So, like, I don't know, like, one can argue like, I'm doing diversity and inclusion work, so I should be conscious about it 100% of the time, and making sure that it's never there in like anything that I say. And I do make mistakes, and I guess it's about owning that, but also helping others to see it in themselves when they do it. It's very tricky, like both Rosemary and Colletta were talking about, like, the taking the time to reflect. I think it's about that first, the individual work, so that, because it's very hard to challenge on a massive scale unless we have done it individually in our own journeys, especially as allies.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I just say something about that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, white supremacy is about power, is about misconception and misunderstanding in terms of, I think for me, an internalized I'm better, and an internalized, and it's historical. I mean, we talk about historical, back to colonization and back to, do you know, back to images that people have seen. I don't like to take too much time, but a little story about me when I first came to Ireland in the 1980s, and I was studying social work. One of my friends said to me, "Oh, Colletta, you know, when I look at you, what I think about is about Black babies, pennies for Black babies. I look at you and I think, oh my God, you've come to thank me. All the pennies I put in the box for Black babies." That's something she had internalized. And when she was growing up, her mother used to give her this penny for the Black baby, and she'd put it in the box, and the Black baby would shake its head. I just think that white supremacy, how do we eradicate it? It's about being conscious of it, being aware of it, I think, being aware of its origins, being aware that it's a falsehood, that really it's a falsehood, that it's a lie that we have been led to believe, and that we need to challenge ourselves around it, and it won't go away itself. It's a journey. It's a journey that people have got to work on in order to challenge themselves. Sorry, Elizabeth.
No problem. Thank you so much, Colletta, and thank you, Vessy, for answering. It's important to emphasize the point both of you guys made about holding ourselves accountable and recognizing the bias within ourselves. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I thank you for our lovely speakers and all their insights. I think this conversation was very, very insightful. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This video will be posted on our YouTube channel, so you can check it out there also. Have an amazing evening, everyone. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.